Azoi.
Erev Tov, everyone. So, as we all know, the entire subject of tzaras, which to us is mysterious beyond words, somehow is a result of a lashon hara. And we see that in the Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu said negative things about the Jewish people, said, "Vehem lo yaminu li." The Jewish people won't believe me. They're not worthy of redemption. So one of the miracles that was assigned to him that would help the Jewish people believe in him was the fact that he became a Metzorah by inserting his hand over his breast and then taking it out, it turned white, and then he had to put it back in order for it to gain health. And we find in the Torah that when Miriam spoke lashon hara against Moshe also, so she also suffered from tzaras. So the Chazal saw that that was an intimate relationship between the sin of lashon hara and between tzaras. Now, the Meforshim point out that there's a connection, therefore, between the end of last week's parsha of Shmini and the beginning of this week's parsha of Tazria. And that connection lies in the fact that there the Torah, so to speak, limited the intake of what we can put into our mouth, what we can eat. So that was the division line of kashrus. And here the Torah puts a limit on what comes out of our mouth in what we're allowed to speak and what we're not allowed to speak. Chazal always thought that lashon hara was an all-pervasive avera, simply because the nature of human beings is that we are gregarious, that we speak, we talk. And if someone is too quiet, quote unquote, then we think something's wrong with that person. So we want the person always to speak. Well, so therefore, it is very possible that lashon hara is all pervasive, and that's what Chazal said, that Rubam begezel, the majority of people end up that somehow they have some wealth, money that's not really theirs. Umiyuton bi'avoros, a minority of people are physically immoral, but v'kulon bi'avak lashon hara. But everyone is covered at least with the dust of lashon hara. So you have a concept called avak lashon hara. It's not lashon hara, but it's like we have days here in Israel where it's very dusty. The desert blows in. So if you're outside on that day, no matter what you do, it's all pervasive. It affects you. So avak lashon hara is being able to hear lashon hara as well. There's, aside from the avera of speaking lashon hara, there's also the transgression of hearing, paying attention to Lashon Hara. The Chafetz Chaim writes in his Sefer in Shmiras HaLashon, a remarkable thing. He writes, he said, Ze Arboim Shona, it's 40 years now that to the best of my knowledge, he says, Lo dibarti Lashon Hara. I didn't speak Lashon Hara already for 40 years. V'zeli Esrim Shona. And now it's 20 years Shelo Shamati Lashon Hara, that I didn't hear Lashon Hara. So not to hear Lashon Hara takes a greater discipline than speaking Lashon Hara. For 20 years, the Chafetz Chaim did not speak Lashon Hara, but nevertheless he heard Lashon Hara. So his son writes that was because of the fact that people came to talk to him. And it took 20 years for it to sink in to people not to tell him Lashon Hara. So that's a great test of the person. And so that resulted in this mysterious disease that it was used to be translated as leprosy, but it's not leprosy. And so we don't know what it is. And what is interesting is that the Torah said if the person suffers from it, you don't go to Kupot Cholim. You don't go to the hospital. You don't go to a doctor. You go to the Kohen, and the Kohen is the diagnostician. He determines, and it's all subjective. The Torah itself says, the Kohen, in his opinion, is saying it spread, it didn't spread, it's whiter, it's not whiter, it's this color, it's not that color. So the Meforshim will explain that the Kohen had to have a special sensitivity for this. Not only a sensitivity in the tzaras, but a sensitivity in the Lashon Hara. And to avoid it at all costs. And that's why it says by Midasov Shel Aaron HaKohen was that he was Ohev Shalom, V'rodev Shalom. Anybody that speaks Lashon Hara cannot be claimed as a peace-loving person, because automatically you're stirring up animosities. Automatically you're saying that someone is wrong, no good. Chazal really stretched it to the limit. He said Lashon Hara is not only Lashon Hara when you speak evil things about people, Lashon Hara is even when you speak about good things about people, because it provokes a reaction. I tell you, he's a great guy. He's a wonderful person. He's a big balzdaka. So the reaction of people many times is, what do you mean he's a great balzdaka? The Lord made him a millionaire, so you can afford to be a balzdaka. So by praising him, it will lead to demeaning him. It will lead to therefore the best thing is not to say anything about Yosef. And not even positive. I remember that when I had the yeshiva in Muncie, so in high school in the United States, they had the parent-teacher conferences 2 or 3 times a year. the parents of the students came in to discuss with the teachers. And I had one of the Rabbeim in the yeshiva, who is truly a very pious Jew. So he said he's not going to have the parent-teacher conference because he doesn't want to say anything about any of the students. Because if he says the student is good, so then that's also Lashon Hara. And if he says the student is not good, so it's certainly Lashon Hara. I remember I had to take him to a noted Rav who instructed him that he was able to do so because it was for the benefit of the student and the benefit of the parents, and that didn't fall into the purview of Lashon Hara. Because of the fact that the matter is so complicated, the Chafetz Chaim wrote a Shulchan Aruch about it. So they once asked him, he wrote it in the 1800s, the late 1800s. So they said for 3,500 years, there was no Shulchan Aruch about Lashon Hara. Why do you feel impelled that now you need it? So he said, I'll tell you the difference between my generation and the generation of my grandparents, the Chafetz Chaim said. The generation of my parents, if someone said Lashon Hara and he realized he said it, his language was he gave a krechts. He gave a deep sigh of regret for having done so. He said, in our generation, nobody sighs anymore. Nobody even feels guilty about it. And therefore, without that, so he said, you need the Shulchan Aruch that you didn't have before. What time is Maariv? So in Tanakh, we find a number of cases of saras. One is going to be in the Haftorah. Well, we won't read that Haftorah this week, but the usual Haftorah of Tazria is regarding the general from Aram who is stricken with saras and is healed by the Novi Elisha by his immersing himself in the waters of the Yarden. But we have the famous case that the Tanakh tells us that Uziyahu, the king of Yehuda, who was a righteous king, was somehow afflicted with saras. And the Gemara says, the Tanakh describes it as a ra'ash, an earthquake happened. So the Gemara interprets that the earthquake was that he became a Metzora, and that the Novi had to come to chastise him, and they went to the Kohen, etc. Again, because of the negative attitude towards the Jewish people, which oftentimes happens. People in power feel that the audience, the citizenry, they're the ones that are not responsive, and therefore they do their best, and the people don't do, so it's the people's fault. So again, it was overcome with saras, and the Tanakh calls that a rash. We see in the Novi Yeshayahu, he says, Shnosayim lifnei harash. 2 years before the great earthquake, this and this happened. And the Gemara says the great earthquake was that Uziyahu became a Metzora. There are those that say that both things happened. That there was an earthquake, and a mikra yotzim b'nei pshuto, was an earthquake here in Eretz Yisrael, and that Uzziel became a Metzora, and that the earthquake was a result of the fact that he became a Metzora. So in any event, we see that the Torah put a great deal of emphasis about what comes out of our mouth, and not only about what comes into our mouth. So a lot of people are medagdik, you get a shiloh, which efsher, which this, which that, all of which is valid. But we should also consider not only what comes in, but what goes out, because that is the basis of having a peaceful, tolerant society, is not to talk about others. Rabbi Hanani ben Akash Omer Ratzah Kodesh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Yisrael V'Chol Chever Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar Adonai Chavei Tzman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.